The wind blew over the high plains like the earth releasing a deep, tired sigh, curving the grass and sweeping the hills in the shadowy light of evening. Overhead, the sky burned like old copper, full of clouds that muttered of rain. Along the thin strip of dirt road, little more than a deer trail, a single rider rode. Wrapped in a tattered blanket, she glided silently, a silence that was older than the earth itself. Thatcher Boone had seen her before she'd ever made it to the porch. He was in the barn, oiling a sheen into the saddle by the faint light of lamplight. The barn door stood open, and the evening cold filtered through. Then there was the noise, tacit, measured hoofbeats. He stiffened, his heart constricting for reasons he couldn't quite define. Gazing through the thin veil of mist, he spotted her. She did not speak. She slid off slowly, her body collapsing like the period at the end of a sentence that had lingered too long. Her horse snorted, a curl of steam unwinding into the chilled air. She stepped onto the porch like a ghost reluctant to rouse the sleeping. And then, just as thunder growled somewhere in the distance, she lifted her chin and knocked, twice. When Thatcher opened the door, they locked eyes. Hers were black as damp soil, unblinking and steady. Rain streamed down her cheeks, but she didn't flick it away. Her voice, gentle but heavy, shattered the silence. "May I stay here tonight?" The world paused for a moment. Thatcher remained silent. Instead, he dropped to one knee. Not in courtesy, not even in worship, but in something stranger, like a recollection touching upon guilt. His hand stretched out toward the hem of her blanket, not to yank it away, but to confirm she was real. Her boots were split and worn, her braids loose and wind-tattered. Mud stuck to her hem, and grief clung to her more persistently still. Within, the hearth of the cabin retained a tenuous ember of heat. Thatcher revived it, placing 2 new logs upon the flames. She walked softly, gaze sweeping the room but not settling anywhere. They paused upon a worn photograph, a woman in a white bonnet, smiling with a slant that promised mischief. Thatcher saw and, without comment, set it face down. "I don't inquire," he said finally. "If you desire tea, there's sage and honey." She nodded and sat down by the fire, her hands curling and uncurling as if marking time to an old, forgotten beat. He made the tea in silence, the steam rising between them like a ghost attempting to solidify. When he handed her the cup, their hands touched. They didn't move back. The moment was gone like candlelight in a draught. "Thank you," she whispered. Thatcher looked at her for a beat. "You're White Elk's daughter, aren't you?" She didn't respond immediately. His gaze fell to the boards, scrying the grain for words. "Thought you'd moved on from these lands. Heard the governor's son proposed you a ring of mountain silver." Her smile was weak, but her eyes remained cold. "I've had enough of being proposed things intended to hold me back." Outside, the initial raindrops started falling. She gazed into the fire as if attempting to recall something she had never been told. The fire colored her skin with amber tones, as if she were carved wood. "Do you ever hear your ghosts?" she suddenly inquired. Thatcher's eyes remained focused on the fire. "Sometimes," he replied. "Mostly they just observe." As darkness fell, he showed her the bed, drawing fresh sheets from the chest. She did not object. He made a straw mattress beside the fire for himself and folded his coat under his head. The wind moaned soft through the crevices of the cabin walls, and the stillness between them was warmer than any flame. In the darkness, she whispered, "Hawk!" He assumed she called to him, but when he swung around, she was fast asleep. That evening, he had a vision of a red ribbon caught on barbed wire, lashing in a dry gale. She had a vision of a black horse surmounting a high ridge, its rider's hair streaming behind, a brother's laughter ringing through canyon walls. In her vision, the world still remembered her name. Morning crept in gently. Snow had fallen overnight, enough to even out the edges of things. Thatcher awoke to the scent of oats and the thud of hooves. She was already out. She had no coat on, elbows rolled to the elbows, working his horses like she'd done it every morning of her life. Her breath blew in little clouds as she spoke to them in her own words. The mayor, his mare, nuzzled its muzzle against her shoulder like an old friend giving a benediction. Thatcher stood in the window, one hand leaning against the chill of the glass. Something changed in him, not desire, not yet, but something more ancient. Acknowledgement, perhaps. He laced up his boots and walked outside. She didn't say hello, merely handed him the feed bag, and they worked together in brooding silence, their movements those of two people once accustomed to the same rhythm. A low, old vibration came from her lips, a song that sounded drawn from the earth. He did not inquire. She did not clarify. They drove into town later in the day. The wagon creaked under a burden of hay, wheels grumbling. She rode beside him, her hair well-brushed and braided, her shoulders straight. The road constricted through pines and widened into the dry skeleton of Hollow Junction. Eyes trailed after them. Whispers multiplied like thistles. Elsie Moore crossed herself. A child was dragged into a doorway. Sheriff Klein intercepted them before they could tie the horses off, hat in hand, mouth clenched tight. "Thatcher," he said slowly. "This town's small. Eyes are sharp." "I haven't done anything wrong," Thatcher replied. "Not yet," Klein said. "But they'll talk like you have." She did not respond. Within the general store, she moved with peaceful assurance, purchasing sewing needles and thread, paying in silver coin. A boy looked up at her from behind a box of apples. She knelt down, smiled, and put a small carved bird into his hand. He laughed. His mother did not. That evening, following dinner, Thatcher went out on the porch for a cigarette. Propped up against the doorframe was a shattered arrow. No note.
No whisper.
Only the wind running its chilly fingers along his back. He left it alone, but she nonetheless noticed it. At the table, when his anger crept into his tone, she placed a hand on his. "Let them bear their own burden," she said. "It's not yours." She talked then of her people, how they had dispersed when her father was killed, how her name had been circulated as a trophy among politicians. She talked about Hawk, her brother, whose skeleton now nourished the tall grasses of Spirit Valley. "I took a simple life," she said, gaze unwavering. "I didn't realize how hard it would be to live." He explained to her his wife, who had passed away in childbirth to their son, how he'd paralyzed, unable to ride to the doctor, how he'd buried them both. She did not flinch. She just put her palm against his, not to forgive him, but to say to him, "You stayed." They never spoke of it again. That night, they repaired the fence side by side, her fingers confident with the wire. The sky above them pinked out, land vibrating in the stillness of evening. A rabbit stood nearby in the sagebrush, not fearing anything. Once, their hands brushed together. He jerked back. She didn't appear to notice. The days that followed found them in a weird, wordless rhythm, until the fire. It started with lightning over Widow's Bluff. They caught wind of it first. Pungent, acrid, insistent. Smoke billowed like a black sun over the hillsides. Horses stamped at the gate. The air thickened. They did not linger. Saddling the mare, they rode hard with buckets and shovels, stinging sweat in their eyes. The wind shrieked. The fire spat like rifles, consuming grass with hungry jaws. She walked through it as if born of the flame. When flames sprang the ridge, he fell, lost his hold. She pulled him back. Later, they stood side by side, soot on their cheeks, as the last sparks died out. "You saved her," he said, looking at his mare. "You saved us," she replied, resting her forehead against his shoulder. "I only did what you would have done." They didn't move for a very long time. Then he said her name, slowly, as if it unlocked something that had been locked away. It was like rain, wind, and cedar smoke. "It's the first time you've said it," she whispered. "It won't be the last." The following morning, they sat on the porch. The arrow still rested where it had been dropped. Sheriff Klein rode up in silence. "They've begun a petition," he said. "Don't want her around here. Say she's causing trouble." "I don't care," Thatcher said. "I know. But you should hear it from me." She didn't ask what was stated. She already knew. Thatcher gazed out at the horizon for hours. "You can leave tonight. I won't stop you. Her arms crossed over her chest. I stayed once. I'll stay again. Peace doesn't come from running. He looked at her then, really looked. Not a princess, not a symbol, but a woman shaped by wind and loss, standing taller than anyone around her. They sat once more by the fire that night, this time closer. When her shoulder was against his, he made no attempt to move away. She rummaged in her satchel and produced a feather, as white as snow. Tomorrow, she whispered, we go to your wife. He nodded, because love doesn't always ride in with trumpets or oaths. Sometimes it rides soft, drizzly, and waits for you to open up.